what we've heard from our partners, including in discussions with our Egyptian partners, is that there is a desire for stability and there is a desire to see a restoration of Sudan towards the democratic path. Yes, please.
Questions. The first one is on Ethiopia, and the second one is about North Korea. So I'm a little confused about how close the TPLF forces are to Addis Ababa. So what is the State Department's assessment? Are they like outskirts of the capital? And my second question is about North Korean sanctions. It's like China and Russia submitted a draft resolution yesterday to lift all sanctions on North Korea. And 2 days ago, Deputy Special Representative Jung Park had a consultative meeting with South Korean counterparts about humanitarian cooperation. So where are we now exactly in terms of like aid to North Korea?
Where are we in terms of, what was the last part of the question?
So humanitarian aid to North Korea.
Got it. So in terms of Ethiopia, look, we are not in the habit of offering military assessments or tactical assessments from the podium. What we have said is that we are concerned by the expansion of the conflict, by the expansion of the fighting from Tigray and into surrounding areas. Of course, public accounts have spoken to the advance of the TPLF and the OLA and their allies, including towards the capital city. That is in part why we have urged, in no uncertain terms, American citizens to make arrangements to leave the country using the commercial options that remain available in and out of the capital city of Addis Ababa. It's also why we have underscored the need and the imperative for all parties to the conflict, the TPLF, the Ethiopian government, the OLA, and others, to engage in negotiations towards a ceasefire immediately and without preconditions. When it comes to North Korea, you were referring to I believe, a draft UN Security Council resolution on the part of the PRC in Russia. As you know, we don't comment on the internal workings of the UN Security Council system, but we do remain committed to the sanctions regime. We call on all UN members to fulfill their sanctions obligations under existing UN Security Council resolutions to limit the DPRK's ability to acquire resources and technology needed to advance its threatening and unlawful WMD and ballistic missile programs. We continue to seek sustained and serious diplomacy with the DPRK. We call on Pyongyang to refrain from provocations and to engage in discussions. Our goal, as we have said on any number of occasions, remains the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We have no hostile intent towards the DPRK. Our intent is to engage in sustained, constructive diplomacy, including with the DPRK. We've also made the point that even when we have profound disagreements with a particular government or a particular regime, as of course we do in the case of the DPRK, we take into account the humanitarian conditions of the people of that country. And so we are concerned about the humanitarian situation in the DPRK. We are working with our allies and our partners to determine how we might be able to support the humanitarian needs of the North Korean people, and that is something that we're committed to do. Christina.
To follow up on Sudan, Ethiopia. The head of or a spokesperson for the TPLF was on the BBC. I think it was this morning, but it might have been last night, and was asked essentially, could you possibly be headed towards the capital? Is that your goal? And he said, no, we will. That is where we're going. So as you're selling to us, you're calling for a halt to military advances. Is that something the U.S. has communicated directly to the TPLF? And how are you working towards halting those advances?
We have been in direct contact with the parties. We've been in direct contact, as I offered in some detail, to the Ethiopian government, including in recent hours. We've also been in direct contact with the TPLF.
Who was making that contact?
We don't have details to offer on that, but we have made our messaging very clear. We have done that in public, as you've heard from me today and yesterday, and in the preceding weeks and months, but we've also underscored that message privately as well. That the only solution in this case is for the parties to the conflict to engage in dialogue towards a negotiated ceasefire. That is the only way that the violence will be diminished and ultimately be abated. That is the only way that the humanitarian emergency that people in Tigray and surrounding regions are experiencing, that's the only way that humanitarian emergency will be mitigated. So we've been very clear with the parties in public and in private as well.
But it sounds like if you're calling for them to stop the military advances, there's some genuine concern that they might not stop, right? And they could threaten the capital? We
have been very clear that we are concerned by the escalating violence. We are concerned by the expansion of the fighting. So we have not been shy about highlighting our concern for the situation. Yes.
Ned, the Lebanese information minister has refused to resign, and Hezbollah condemned the American and external intervention in the Lebanese government affairs. Do you have any comment?
We had an opportunity, as you know, to address this yesterday. Our point has been that we urge diplomatic channels to remain open between the parties to ensure meaningful dialogue on the pressing issues facing Lebanon. In this case, those diplomatic channels, Lebanon's ties in different forms with its regional partners and neighbors, are important not only for the sake of diplomacy, but also for the sake of the Lebanese people. On the topic of dire humanitarian conditions, the people of Lebanon have suffered for far too long from mismanagement, from corruption, from inflation, from other economic pressures that the international community, on an urgent basis, has sought to alleviate. As you know, the Secretary had an opportunity to meet with the Prime Minister. We did so on the margins of COP26 in Glasgow. We had an opportunity to meet the Secretary had an opportunity to meet with his Emirati counterpart, with his Saudi counterpart. Lebanon was a topic of discussion. And the point of all of those engagements was to underscore that the needs of the Lebanese people, the need for channels of communication to remain open as we look for ways to alleviate the suffering of the people of Lebanon.
But any reaction to Hezbollah statement condemning the external and the American intervention in the Lebanese government affairs?
You are not finding the United States intervening in the government of Lebanon. What we are doing is using appropriate resources to help the people of Lebanon, to see to it that we can work with the international community to provide the people of Lebanon with much needed humanitarian relief.
Well, and the military of Lebanon with what you might say is much needed military assistance, correct?
Correct. The Lebanese Armed Forces is an important actor in Lebanese society, and we have, again, engaged partners in the region not to intervene in Lebanon's internal politics, but in an effort to help the people of Lebanon. And frankly, if I think there would be a desire to see all actors set aside their parochial agendas and to focus on the urgent needs of the people of Lebanon. Yes?
Thinking about foreign intervention in Lebanon and Hezbollah, it takes us to Iran. And I apologize if you touched this yesterday, but with news that the Iranians are willing to come back to the table, I just want to ask again if it is the policy of the administration to lengthen and strengthen the deal, and if indeed, for example, the sunset clause, which expires in 2025, is something that you're absolutely intent on extending.
Thank you for that. So let me just make one broad point before I get to your question. that under the terms of the 2015 deal, that there are provisions that expire within 15, 20, 25 years. But the most important provision, the requirement that Iran can never acquire a nuclear weapon, that never expires. That is permanent. What the JCPOA put forward was a permanent, was a verifiable mechanism to ensure that Iran is never able or allowed to acquire a nuclear weapon. So yes, we remain interested to determine whether we can achieve a mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA. We continue to believe that a mutual return to compliance is the most effective means by which to put Iran's nuclear program back in the box that it was in for several years after the deal was implemented in 2016. So that is the first step. Now, your question was about lengthening and strengthening the deal. We have always said that as the first step, we want to see to it that Iran's nuclear program is once again constrained. And so that is why in the first instance we focused on determining whether a mutual return to compliance could be feasible. We remain interested in that. If we are able to achieve a mutual return to compliance, we will then use that JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, as a baseline to negotiate what we have, not only to lengthen and strengthen the provisions of the deal, but to put on the table and to discuss in a productive and hopefully useful way other issues of concern, issues that are of concern not only to the United States, but also of concern to our allies and partners in the region as well.
So is that the framework, that the first step in negotiation is just to return to compliance? And if that's the case, why is there any incentive for Iran to go any further once they've agreed that?
Absolutely. The most pressing challenge we face with Iran, and I would say in the Middle East more broadly, is an Iranian nuclear program that does not have the constraints that are spelled out in the JCPOA. So yes, our first priority is to determine whether we can negotiate a mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA, not as a means to salvage the JCPOA, but as a means to see to it that Iran is once again permanently and verifiably prevented from acquiring a nuclear weapon. Look, we are focused on that as our first step. We do hope we'll be able to get there, and we do hope from there we'll be able to engage in constructive diplomacy vis-a-vis the other challenges that Iran poses to the United States, to our allies, to our partners in the region.
What leverage would you have beyond reducing sanctions? After that, they've come back to compliance. Then what leverage have you got?
So we have tremendous leverage acting not only ourselves, but much more so when we act in concert with our allies and partners in the region. The forms of leverage, some of them are well known, some of them are included in the formula that is the predicate of the JCPOA. But again, right now we are focused on that first task, and that is to ensure that Iran's nuclear program is once again constrained and that Iran is once again permanently and verifiably prevented from acquiring a nuclear weapon.
Can you just drill down on what it is your understanding, what is it in the JCPOA that you understand to mean that Iran commits to a permanent and verifiable situation where it will not acquire a nuclear weapon? Is it the NPT, the mention of the Non-Proliferation Treaty in the JCPOA? Is it the fatwa? What is it? Because otherwise it's not in there. So if it's your understanding that that's what it is that makes it permanent, okay, but is that what it is?
So the verification and monitoring stipulations of the JCPOA. No, but you asked about a couple elements. So the verification and monitoring elements of the JCPOA, they do not expire. We're not reliant on any proclamations or fatwa, to use the term you did, that the Iranian government has put forward. What we are relying on are the international instruments that have been negotiated and that until recent years had been in place that had permanently and verifiably constrained Iran's ability to acquire a nuclear weapon.
They hadn't permanently done it. There might have been it might be verifiable in terms of
There is
the limits. It's verifiable in terms of what the deal sets out to be verifiable. But I don't understand. Is the permanence that you're talking about? Is it your understanding? And cover the whole negotiation. I still don't get what the permanence here is, unless it is you're hanging your hopes on Iran's compliance with an NPT.
The NPT is an important tool. It is an important complement to the JCPOA. So the North Korea comparison, the verification and monitoring that the JCPOA spells out for Iran is certainly not what the United States and what the international community had in place with the DPRK prior to its production of a nuclear weapon.
Well, when you talk about, in terms of the JCPOA, in terms of the agreement itself, when you talk about the permanence of it, you're talking about the NPT.
The prohibition on Iran ever obtaining a nuclear weapon does not expire, and the JCPOA affords us important tools, including the verification and monitoring regime, to see to it that Iran is abiding by that permanent prohibition on ever obtaining a nuclear weapon.
Is there anything in the JCPOA itself, as you understand it, outside of Iranian compliance with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, that permanently constrains them?
The JCPOA affords us the tools we need. The tools we need, Matt. It affords us the tools we need to see to it that Iran is permanently barred from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
One other, non-related to this, I just want to know if from yesterday, if you guys have made any conclusions or determinations based on what the Israelis gave you about these 6 Palestinian NGOs. Is there anything new on that?
Well, as you know, there was a delegation in town last week. We received detailed information from the Israeli government. We appreciated the consultation. We're reviewing the information that they provided us. Nike.
Thank you. Can I switch gear to Winter Olympic? It will start in 3 months. Has the U.S. government made a decision on whether or not to participate in the Winter Olympics? The reason I ask is because the G20 leaders declaration, which the U.S. is part of, appear to give the wordings to give the nod.
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of your question.
Right, the wordings in the G20 leaders declaration appeared to give the nod.
Look, I don't have anything for you beyond the text of the G20 communique that you referenced. As for the position of the United States, don't have anything new. But what I will say, and what should be clear, is that we continue to have profound concerns about the situation in Xinjiang and a number of other issues pertaining to human rights in the PRC. Sean.
Correctly, that the U.S. government is not boycotting Beijing to host the Winter Olympic. The reason I ask is because the wordings in that declaration said the G20 leaders look ahead to Beijing Winter Olympics and Paralympics 2022 as opportunities for competition for athletes from around the world, which serves as a symbol of humanity's resistance.
Again, I don't have anything for you beyond the text of that communique, but we have been crystal clear about where we stand on what is transpiring in Xinjiang and the human rights abuses that have and that are taking place within the PRC. Sean.
The Beijing-based foreign correspondents, the FCCC, the Foreign Correspondents Club of China statement this week to express.
So on a number of occasions, we've discussed press freedom with our PRC counterparts. We urge PRC officials not to limit freedom of movement and access for journalists and to ensure that they remain safe and able to report freely, including at the Olympic and the Paralympic Games. Sean.
Venezuela. The International Criminal Court said yesterday that there'll be an investigation on whether crimes against humanity were committed in 2017 in Venezuela. Does the United States have a position either on this investigation, whether crimes against humanity were committed, and on Venezuela, that being Maduro actually cooperating with this?
Well, we take note of the ICC's Office of the Prosecutor to open an investigation into the situation in Venezuela. This decision follows a preliminary examination phase initiated through a referral from a group of states parties to the Rome Statute, including countries that share the commitment we have to a peaceful, democratic future in Venezuela. As we've said, we support efforts to establish a peaceful, stable, and democratic Venezuela. We also support justice and accountability measures and programs that strengthen democratic institutions, transparency, and the rule of law, as well as inclusion, economic empowerment, and access to information in Venezuela. We remain committed to promoting accountability for human rights violations and abuses, and for justice for victims of atrocities. We and many of our like-minded democratic allies and democratic partners are united in denouncing the human rights violations and the human rights abuses that are occurring in Venezuela. Sure.
It's been a couple weeks since the Citgo 6 were taken from house arrest. Do you have any update on them and their whereabouts right now?
Well, as you know, the safety, the security, the safety of all wrongfully detained U.S. nationals is among our highest priorities. We call on the Maduro regime to release them immediately, the Citgo 6, so that they can return home to their families in the United States. Whether the context is Venezuela, whether the context is any other country, using wrongful detention as a bargaining chip represents a threat to safety of everyone traveling, working, and living abroad. We oppose this practice everywhere. We oppose this practice anywhere. The department, including our Special Envoy for Hostage Affairs, Ambassador Carstens, we are committed to bringing these Americans home. We are also committed to bringing home another wrongfully detained American citizen, Matthew Heath. We are in frequent touch with the families of the wrongfully detained Citgo 6, and that they have reported to us that the Citgo 6 have been moved back to prison. At this time, however, we don't have independent confirmation of their precise whereabouts or where they've been taken. Yes, please.
And on Syria, it looks like Turkey is building up forces in northeastern Syria to attack the Kurds there. Do you have any reaction?
I don't have a specific response to that. We have called on all parties to respect the ceasefires that are in place. Humara.
Just on Israel, Ned, I don't think we've asked this the past couple of weeks. Is the administration still going ahead with reopening consulate in Jerusalem?
I can tell you. I can tell you you were not here yesterday because we did discuss this yesterday.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, we've been clear. The secretary has been clear. He's spoken to this on a couple of occasions now, but don't have any update beyond that.
But is there a timeline?
I don't have a timeline to offer for you at the moment. Yes, Sean.
I think we've discussed this a little bit ago, but not in the past couple days. Burma. Denny Fenster, the new charges against him. Do you have anything to say about that?
So this goes back to the priority I was speaking to regarding the welfare and the safety of American citizens detained overseas. We remain deeply concerned over the continued detention of Danny Fenster. He was working as a journalist in Burma when he was detained. His detention, the detention of so many others, it's a sad reminder of the continuing human rights and humanitarian crisis facing the country of Burma, facing the Burmese, but also facing foreign nationals, including Americans who happen to be in Burma. We are closely monitoring Danny's situation and his case. We're continuing to press the Burmese regime to release Danny immediately. We are aware that the regime recently did bring additional charges against Danny. The profoundly unjust nature of Danny's detention is plain for all the world to see. and these charges only put a further spotlight on that. Again, the regime should take the prudent step of releasing him now. Yep.
Quickly, Burma, a different topic there, but Bill Richardson's visit. Do you have anything to say about, particularly his meeting with the junta chief, whether that's on message for what the United States wants? Obviously, he's going in private capacity. Do you have any view about his trip?
Well, we're aware of his trip. As you said, he was acting, I believe the trip has come to a conclusion, but he was acting in a private capacity. This was a private effort by the former governor to visit Burma. We know that he has extensive experience working on humanitarian issues. This effort was not sponsored by or on behalf of the U.S. government, but of course we hope to see to it that humanitarian conditions, including humanitarian access in Burma, are improved going forward. Yes?
Pentagon released a report yesterday saying that China would have 1,000 nuclear warheads by 2030. It was a big surprise to many people. I just wonder how worrying that is for the State Department and what it says about the future of relations with China and China's ambitions.
Well, we have spoken to the PRC's development and plans to develop its nuclear arsenal. Again, it suggests that China is leaving behind its previous nuclear doctrine of limited deterrence. It is the responsibility of nuclear-armed nations to act prudently and to, in the case of the development of a nuclear weapons program, we have sought to engage the PRC when it comes to arms control. We have called for dialogue. We think all responsible countries that have these weapons should engage in an arms control dialogue. We remain ready and willing to do that, and we've made that known to PRC authorities. Yes?
They don't seem willing to listen.
We have made very clear that we feel that it is the responsibility of responsible countries that have these weapons to do just that. As you know, we've engaged in strategic stability dialogue with the Russian Federation. That dialogue has been constructive. It has been useful. It is our hope, it is our intention to engage in an arms control dialogue with the PRC as well, given what we know to be true of all countries that possess these weapons and the responsibilities we have.
So any update on the Biden-President Xi meeting or a date on that?
I don't. I would need to refer you to the White House. Yes?
So this is Ines Pohl from Deutsche Welle. I have a follow-up question to China, as there is a certain ambiguity between what President Biden says in the White House. How far would the United States go to protect Taiwan?
We have been very clear about that. There has been no change in our policy towards Taiwan. Our defense relationship with Taiwan is and has been guided by the Taiwan Relations Act. We will uphold our commitments under that act. We'll continue to support Taiwan's self-defense. And will continue to oppose any unilateral actions that seek to change the status quo. We remain committed to our One China policy, which itself is guided by the 6 assurances, the 3 joint communiques, and the Taiwan Relations Act that I mentioned before.
Precisely what that mean? Would this include military action? I mean, this is one big question.
Under the Taiwan Relations Act, we have a commitment to continue to support Taiwan's self-defense, and we will continue to oppose any unilateral actions that seek to change the status quo in cross-state relations.
Does this include military action? You didn't answer that question.
The Taiwan Relations Act spells this out. We will continue to act consistent with the Taiwan Relations Act.
You said our One China policy. So is that an indication that it's different than China's One China principle?
We have a One China policy that is distinct from the PRC's version of it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.